Sometimes life doesn't break you with storms or tragedies, it breaks you with silence, with loneliness so deep that even the sound of your own heartbeat feels foreign. Dr. Adrian Hale, the city's most brilliant yet cold-hearted physician, had everything a man could want: wealth, respect, prestige. And yet, at 40, he had never let a single woman close to him, not emotionally, not physically. People called him a machine in a man's body. But when an 18-year-old girl, desperate for survival, stepped into his life offering her company for one night in exchange for money, the walls he had built around his heart began to tremble. What started as a transaction soon turned into a night that neither of them could ever forget. Dr. Adrian Hale was known as a man of perfection. Tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing gray eyes that looked more like shards of winter ice than windows to a soul, he commanded silence wherever he went. His reputation wasn't just about saving lives in the operating room, it was about the aura he carried. Patients feared him as much as they trusted him. Nurses whispered that he had no heart. His colleagues admired him but never dared to get too close. Adrian had built his life around one principle: emotions cloud judgment. And judgment, in medicine, could cost lives. So he detached himself from everything and everyone. No flings, no warmth, no distractions. At home, his mansion was a palace of emptiness. Glass walls, white marble floors, black leather chairs, everything immaculate, everything soulless. He came home to silence and woke up to silence. He had no one waiting at the dining table, no one asking about his day, no one daring to touch the hand that had saved thousands. He told himself he preferred it this way. After all, love was weakness. Desire was dangerous. Touch was a liability. But even ice cracks when the pressure is too strong. On the other side of the city, life looked nothing like Adrian's sterile palace. Mariah Bennett, just 18, had already tasted more bitterness than most people did in a lifetime. Her father had died when she was only 12. Her mother, once a cheerful woman, had fallen into illness and never recovered. By 17, Mariah was the only one keeping the roof above their heads, working 2 jobs, skipping meals, selling anything she could. But poverty is cruel. Rent was late, medical bills were piling up, and her mother's medication was running out. She had begged employers for extra shifts, but no one cared for a fragile, skinny girl with tired eyes. That night, sitting by her mother's bedside, Mariah's desperation reached its peak. She had overheard 2 girls at the diner laughing about how men in the city would pay for company, sometimes just for a night of companionship, sometimes more. At first, she dismissed it, horrified. But hunger doesn't care about morality. And when her landlord threatened eviction, she knew she had no choice left. With trembling hands, she put on her only decent dress, a faded blue one with tiny tears she had sewn over and over again. She brushed her hair, looked into the cracked mirror, and whispered to herself, just one night. Just enough money to save Mama. Her footsteps that evening led her to a world she didn't belong to, a world where wealthy men paid for what they desired. And fate, with its twisted sense of irony, placed her in the path of the coldest man alive, Drive. Adrian Hale. The meeting was nothing short of awkward fate. Adrian had been forced by his hospital board to attend a charity gala, something he hated. Crowds, meaningless chatter, women with painted smiles trying to flirt with him for status. He stood alone by the bar, sipping mineral water, when his gaze accidentally caught hers. Mariah wasn't supposed to be there. She had followed a woman she met who said wealthy men often sought company at such events. She was nervous, out of place, her dress too simple compared to the glittering gowns around her. Yet her eyes, wide, vulnerable, and desperate, locked onto Adrian's. Something in that gaze struck him. Not desire, not seduction, but raw hunger, for survival, for hope. It was the first crack in his icy heart. When she nervously approached him, whispering an offer for his company, Adrian almost dismissed her immediately. But instead, he found himself saying words he had never spoken before. "How much do you need?" Mariah froze, not expecting directness. Her lips trembled as she whispered the amount, just enough for medicine and rent. Adrian could have laughed, it was nothing to him. Yet the way she said it, with shame and tears threatening to spill, made him pause. Something inside him, something long buried, stirred awake. And so began the night that would change them both forever. The gala lights glittered like shattered stars across the marble floor. Adrian Hale was used to ignoring everything, the women, the laughter, the empty words, but Mariah's trembling voice clung to him like a ghost. One night, she whispered, her eyes downcast. I don't need forever. Just enough to buy medicine. Most men would have smirked, seen her as a transaction. But Adrian saw something different. Not a seductress, not a temptress, but a girl caught in the jaws of poverty, trying desperately to survive. His mind told him to walk away. He had no use for distractions. But his lips betrayed him. "Come with me," he said simply. Mariah's heart pounded. She thought he might take advantage of her, claim what men usually claimed. She braced herself for humiliation, for disgust, for the shame of selling a piece of herself. But when she followed him out into the night and into his sleek black car, silence wrapped them both like a cocoon. When Adrian opened the doors to his mansion, Mariah gasped. It wasn't the size that startled her, it was the emptiness. No family photos, no flowers, no warmth. Just glass and stone and polished steel. "This is where you live," she whispered, her voice echoing. "Yes," he said flatly. "Does it bother you?" "It feels lonely," she admitted softly. Adrian blinked. People usually called it elegant, impressive, majestic. No one had ever dared call it lonely. But maybe that was exactly what it was. He gestured for her to sit, and for a moment, neither spoke. She sat nervously on the edge of his leather sofa, clutching her hands, while he stood with his usual rigid posture, studying her as though she were a puzzle he couldn't solve. Finally, he asked, "Tell me why you're really here." Mariah swallowed. Her voice broke as she confessed. About her mother's illness, the unpaid bills, the hunger, the desperation. Every word was a dagger, but she spoke them because she had nothing left to hide. Adrian listened, expression unreadable. But inside, something shifted. For the first time in years, he felt the ache of someone else's pain. Mariah braced herself when he approached. She thought he might demand what she had feared all along. Her body tensed, her breath quickened, but instead of touching her, Adrian did something she never expected. He handed her an envelope. "This should cover your rent. And the medicine," he said. Mariah's eyes widened. Her lips parted in disbelief. "You mean, you don't?" "I don't," he said firmly. Then, almost as an afterthought, his voice softened. "I don't want your body. I want your honesty. Stay, talk, that's all." For a moment, she couldn't process it. Tears filled her eyes, both from relief and from confusion. She had offered herself, and instead, he asked for her presence. So they talked. At first, it was awkward. She spoke hesitantly about her childhood, her dreams that had crumbled under the weight of survival. He shared little, but enough to let her glimpse behind the mask. He told her of the pressure of perfection, the cost of being a man everyone admired but no one truly knew. The clock ticked past midnight, but neither moved. Slowly, the ice around Adrian's heart began to thaw. He found himself watching her eyes when she spoke, noticing the way her hands trembled when she described hunger, the way her voice wavered when she spoke of hope. Mariah, in turn, saw a man who was not cold by choice, but by necessity, a man who had armored himself so tightly against the world that he had forgotten what warmth felt like. By dawn, nothing had happened between them in the way she had feared. And yet, everything had happened. When the sun filtered through the tall glass windows, Mariah stirred from where she had dozed off on the couch. She had fallen asleep mid-conversation, her head resting against the cushions. Adrian had remained awake, watching her, silently studying the rise and fall of her chest, the softness of her presence. She looked fragile, breakable, and yet, stronger than anyone he had ever met. Something inside him, something he thought dead, whispered a truth he refused to admit. He didn't want her to leave. When she finally woke, embarrassed, she whispered, "I should go." But Adrian stopped her. His voice was quiet, but commanding. "Stay." Mariah blinked at him. "Why?" He hesitated, searching for words he wasn't used to saying. "Because for the first time in years, this house doesn't feel empty." Mariah's breath caught. She didn't know if he meant it as pity, or something more. But in his eyes, those cold, gray eyes, she saw the faintest flicker of warmth. And that was enough to change everything. Adrian Hale had performed surgeries that took hours of unwavering focus. He had faced death, made impossible choices, and stood unshaken under pressure. Yet, nothing unsettled him as much as the memory of the girl who had spent one night in his home. Mariah's voice lingered in his ears. Her laughter, shy, uncertain, had broken the silence of his mansion in a way that no symphony could. Her eyes, filled with both fear and hope, haunted him. For years, he had told himself he didn't need anyone. But now, he found himself pausing in the middle of reading medical journals, staring at the memory of her fragile smile. He hated it. He needed control. But the truth was undeniable. Mariah Bennett had cracked something open inside him. Mariah, too, couldn't shake the night away. She had expected shame. She had expected to leave his house with money in hand and regret clawing at her soul. But instead, she left with confusion. Why hadn't he touched her? Why had he given her more respect than most men who only looked at her as cheap labor at the diner? Why had he wanted her voice instead of her body? Her mother noticed the difference. "You're smiling again, Mariah," she whispered weakly from her bed. "What happened?" Mariah shook her head, tears threatening to fall. "Nothing, Mama, just someone was kind." But in her heart, she knew it was not nothing. It was something dangerous, a seed of feeling she had no right to nurture. He was a man of status, of power. She was just a girl clawing her way out of poverty. Their worlds weren't meant to touch. And yet, she longed to see him again. Adrian tried to bury himself in work. But late one evening, after performing a grueling surgery, his steps carried him not to his mansion but to the diner near the hospital. He didn't even know why. He just knew he needed to see her again. Mariah was wiping tables when she looked up and froze. The sight of him, tall, commanding, out of place in his tailored suit, made her heart race. "Dr. Hale," she whispered. He nodded slightly. "You work here?" She flushed with embarrassment. "It's one of my jobs." He studied her for a long moment before asking, "When does your shift end?" "Midnight," she said hesitantly. "I'll wait," he replied simply. And he did. For 3 hours, the most feared surgeon in the city sat quietly in a booth, drinking black coffee, ignoring the curious stares of the staff. When Mariah finally untied her apron and approached him, his eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "Come with me," he said again. This time, Mariah entered his home with less fear, but more confusion. She didn't understand why he wanted her there. He had already helped her. Why return? Adrian poured her tea, something he never did for anyone. The sight of him performing such a simple, human gesture unsettled them both. "You don't owe me anything," Mariah whispered. "I know," he replied. "Then why? Why are you doing this?" Adrian's jaw tightened. He wanted to tell her the truth. That her presence tore at the loneliness he had accepted as his destiny, that she made him feel alive in ways he didn't know were possible. But admitting that meant admitting weakness. So instead, he said, "Because I want to." Silence stretched between them. Mariah's chest rose and fell with emotions she didn't understand. Part of her wanted to run. Part of her wanted to stay forever. And Adrian, for the first time in his life, was afraid. Afraid not of failure, not of death, but of how much he wanted to reach across the space between them and touch her hand. But he didn't, not yet. That night, Mariah sat by the window in his living room, staring at the city lights. "I feel guilty," she whispered. "Why?" Adrian asked, standing behind her. "Because I offered myself to you. Because I thought you'd only see me as cheap. And instead, you've been kinder than I deserve." Adrian's chest tightened. Slowly, he stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "You're not cheap, Mariah. You're priceless. You're braver than most people I know. Don't ever say that again." Her throat constricted. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness but from the unbearable weight of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. Adrian's hand twitched at his side, fighting the urge to touch her shoulder, to wipe away her tears. But he forced himself to remain still. He didn't know how to cross that line without losing the control he had spent a lifetime building. And yet, both of them knew, the line between them was thinning. Rumors have a way of spreading like wildfire, especially in a city that thrives on gossip. It started with the staff at the diner whispering about the cold, untouchable drive. Hale waiting hours just to see an 18-year-old waitress. It spread to the hospital board members who spotted Mariah's fragile figure stepping out of Adrian's luxury car. She's too young. She's poor. She's using him. He's losing his mind. The whispers grew into poison. And Adrian, who had spent years cultivating a flawless reputation, began to notice the stares. But what unsettled him more wasn't the rumors, it was how little he cared about them. For the first time, he wanted something more than approval, more than prestige. He wanted her. Mariah felt the weight of judgment heavier than Adrian did. She saw the looks at the diner, heard the cruel laughter of coworkers. She's probably selling herself. Men like him don't fall for girls like her. The words cut deep, reopening the wounds she thought had started to heal. One night, when Adrian invited her again, she hesitated at his door. "You shouldn't keep seeing me," she whispered. Adrian frowned. "Why?" "Because people are talking. Because they'll ruin you. You've worked so hard, and I'm nothing compared to you." Adrian's gaze hardened. "Don't ever call yourself nothing. And don't think for a second that what people say about me matters more than what I want." Mariah's heart pounded at his words, but doubt still lingered. Could a man like him ever truly choose a girl like her? One evening, as Mariah left the diner, a group of men cornered her in the alley. They were regulars, drunk and cruel. "So, you're the doctor's little pet, huh?" one sneered. "What's it like being bought by a man old enough to be your father?" Mariah froze, fear rising in her throat. When one of them reached for her arm, a black car pulled up, headlights blinding. Adrian stepped out, his presence like a storm. His voice was low, dangerous. "Touch her, and you'll never use your hands again." The men scattered, but the damage was done. Mariah's tears spilled as she whispered, "This is what I was afraid of. They'll never let us be." Adrian's chest tightened, fury burning in him, not at her, but at a world that dared to hurt her. For the first time, he felt powerless outside the operating room. That night, Mariah sat trembling in Adrian's living room, her hands clutching a blanket he had draped over her shoulders. She felt small, broken, and yet, safe. Adrian knelt in front of her, something he had never done for anyone. "Mariah," he said softly, "do you know why I can't let you go?" She shook her head, tears glistening. "Because you make me feel alive. Because you make me remember I'm not just a machine. Because for the first time in my life, I want something that isn't about control or perfection. I want you." Her breath caught. No man had ever spoken to her like that. Not as an object, not as a burden, but as someone worth wanting. Slowly, her trembling hand reached out, brushing against his. It was the smallest touch, but for Adrian Hale, it was everything. His entire body burned as though fire had melted the ice he had carried for decades. And for Mariah, it was the first time she believed she was worthy of love. It wasn't a kiss, not yet. It wasn't passion exploding like in the movies. It was simply his hand closing around hers, holding it as if it were the most fragile, precious thing in the world. But for Adrian, it felt like crossing a line he had sworn never to cross. For Mariah, it felt like stepping into a world she never thought she'd deserve. In that moment, words weren't needed. The silence between them spoke louder than anything else. This was more than survival, more than kindness, more than a transaction. This was the beginning of something that neither of them knew how to handle. And the world wasn't going to let them have it easily. Adrian Hale was not a man accustomed to being questioned. For years, the hospital board had bowed to his brilliance, his results, his untouchable reputation. But now, sitting across from them in a polished conference room, he felt their stares sharp as knives. "Dr. Hale," the chairman said stiffly, "we've received troubling reports." Adrian's gray eyes narrowed. "Reports? About your involvement with a young woman. Barely 18. A diner waitress." The words dripped with disdain. Adrian's jaw tightened. "And how does that affect my surgical ability?" The chairman exchanged looks with the others. "Public image matters. Donors are asking questions. If this continues, your position here could be jeopardized." Adrian leaned forward, his voice like steel. "If saving lives depends on who I spend my time with, then perhaps it's not me who should reconsider their position, but this board." The room fell silent, but Adrian knew the battle had only begun. While Adrian faced pressure at the hospital, Mariah's world was collapsing elsewhere. Her landlord, a greasy man with greedy eyes, stood at their door. "You're late again," he sneered. "I told you, I'm working extra shifts," Mariah began, but he cut her off. "I don't want excuses. If you can keep a doctor waiting around for you, maybe he can pay your rent." Or, his eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "You find another way to make it up to me." Mariah froze, disgust churning in her stomach. But before she could answer, her mother, pale and weak, appeared behind her. "Leave my daughter alone," she said fiercely. The landlord laughed, but he left. Mariah's hands trembled as she shut the door. She couldn't drag Adrian into this. He had enough on his shoulders already. But the fear lingered. Poverty had teeth, and it was closing in. For the next week, Mariah avoided Adrian. She told herself it was for his own good. The hospital was pressuring him, society was watching him, and she didn't want to be the anchor that dragged him down. But the nights were unbearable. She lay awake thinking of his voice, his eyes, the way his hand had held hers with such reverence. She missed him so much it hurt. Adrian, on the other hand, was furious. Not at her, but at her absence. He had opened himself up, allowed himself to feel, and now she was slipping away. He told himself to let her go. It would be easier, safer, logical. And yet, logic failed every time he caught himself looking for her face in the diner windows. It was raining when they finally saw each other again. Mariah had just finished a late shift when Adrian's car pulled up beside her. The door opened, and his commanding voice cut through the storm. "Get in." Her heart pounded as she obeyed. Inside the warmth of the car, silence stretched thick. Finally, Adrian turned to her, his eyes burning. "Why are you avoiding me?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Because I don't want to ruin you. The hospital, the donors, everyone, they're already against you. And me, I'm nothing. I'm just a burden." Adrian's chest rose sharply. His hand clenched the steering wheel before he snapped. "Don't you ever say that again. You think I care about their whispers? About titles? None of it matters without you." Her breath caught. "Why me?" He leaned closer, his voice raw. "Because when you're with me, I'm not empty anymore." For a long moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The rain, the rumors, the fear. It was just them, trapped in a fragile, dangerous truth. And for the first time, Adrian Hale pressed his lips against hers. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't practiced. It was desperate, hungry, like a dam breaking after years of restraint. Mariah gasped, but then melted into him, her hands gripping his shirt as though afraid he would vanish. For Adrian, it was chaos. He had never touched a woman, never allowed himself this weakness. But now, touching her felt like salvation. Every ounce of control he had lived by shattered in that single kiss. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Mariah whispered, "We can't." But Adrian's eyes burned with conviction. "We already have." The days that followed were like stolen fragments of a life neither of them believed they deserved. Adrian would pick Mariah up after her shifts, sometimes just to sit with her in silence, sometimes to talk until dawn. She brought color into his sterile mansion, laughter that echoed against marble walls, warmth that softened his sharp edges. For Mariah, it was like stepping into a dream. She had lived in scarcity for so long that the simplest things Adrian did, pouring her tea, listening to her stories, even leaving a blanket on the sofa when she fell asleep, felt like treasures. They didn't speak of labels. They didn't dare call it love. But every glance, every touch, every kiss whispered the truth neither could deny. They belonged to each other. But the world was watching. Hospital staff whispered about Adrian's obsession with a girl half his age. Donors began pulling back from funding projects under his leadership. And the board grew restless. "You need to end this," the chairman demanded one afternoon. "It's reckless. It's destroying your reputation." Adrian's reply was ice and fire at once. "Then let it burn." But he knew the cost was rising. Meanwhile, Mariah faced her own storm. The landlord returned, angrier this time. "Your doctor can't save you forever," he sneered. "Sooner or later, you'll crawl back to me." Mariah slammed the door in his face, but fear gripped her heart. Poverty had claws, and it would keep scratching until it tore something apart. One evening, Adrian came to the diner, only to find Mariah pale and shaken. She had overheard customers mocking her again, calling her a gold digger, a child playing with fire. When Adrian reached for her hand, she pulled away. "Adrian, maybe they're right," she whispered. His eyes hardened. "Don't do this. I don't want to ruin your career, your life. You've given me so much already." "You haven't ruined anything," he cut in sharply. His voice dropped, raw with emotion. "Mariah, you've saved me." Tears welled in her eyes, but the fear wouldn't let go. "Then why does it hurt so much to stay?" The breaking point came not from whispers, but from betrayal. One of Adrian's colleagues, jealous of his skill, envious of his reputation, leaked photos of him and Mariah together. The headlines exploded. Renowned surgeon in scandal with teen waitress. As Dr. Hale losing his mind over a girl. The hospital suspended him pending review. Donors threatened to withdraw millions. His phone buzzed endlessly, but he ignored it all. When Mariah saw the papers, her hands shook so badly she dropped them. "Adrian, what have I done to you?" He cupped her face, his eyes blazing. "You've done nothing. This is on me, and I would choose you again, every time." But in the shadows of his words, both of them knew, the world would not forgive easily. Pressure crushed them from every side. Adrian's career, the only identity he had ever known, was hanging by a thread. Mariah's mother grew sicker, her medicine harder to afford. The landlord threatened eviction again. One night, overwhelmed, Mariah broke. She stood in Adrian's mansion, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. Adrian froze. "What are you saying? You've lost everything because of me. Your reputation, your work. I can't be the reason you fall." His chest tightened like a vice. He stepped closer, his voice rough. "Mariah, listen to me. You are not the reason I fall. You are the reason I rise." But she shook her head, her heart splintering. "I love you too much to watch you be destroyed for me." And before he could stop her, she was gone. For the first time, Adrian's house was emptier than ever before. The walls echoed with absence. The silence was unbearable. He had lived his whole life untouched, unfeeling. And now that he had tasted warmth, he couldn't return to the cold. Mariah lay awake in her tiny apartment, sobbing quietly so her mother wouldn't hear. She had left to protect him, but all she had done was break both of their hearts. And somewhere, fate was already twisting the knife, preparing one last storm that would decide everything. It was past midnight when Adrian's phone rang. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Dr. Hale." The voice was frantic. It was Mariah. "It's my mom." She collapsed. "Please, please help me." Adrian was already on his feet, keys in hand. He didn't care that the hospital had suspended him. He didn't care that the board had ordered him to stay away from patients. None of it mattered. What mattered was her. When Adrian arrived at the emergency ward, chaos surrounded Mariah's mother. The young resident on duty stammered helplessly. "She's in respiratory failure, sir, but what?" Adrian barked. "The board said you're not to practice until the inquiry." Adrian's glare cut him down. "Do you want to explain to this girl why her mother is dead, or do you want to help me save her?" Without another word, he pushed past, snapping orders with the authority of a man who had spent his life mastering life and death. Mariah stood frozen, hands clasped, tears streaming, as Adrian fought for her mother's life. For hours, Adrian battled the inevitable. Mariah's mother was frail, her body worn down from years of struggle. Machines beeped, nurses rushed, the air thick with tension. Finally, the monitors steadied. Her breathing normalized. "She's stable," Adrian whispered, exhaustion etched in every line of his face. Mariah rushed to him, clutching his hands. You saved her. You saved her." But Adrian only shook his head. "Not me. You gave me something to fight for." Their eyes locked, and for a moment the hospital, the board, the world, none of it existed. Just them. The reprieve didn't last. The next morning, headlines screamed again. "Suspended doctor defies orders, performs unauthorized procedure." The board convened an emergency session. Colleagues who once admired him now called him reckless. This time, Adrian didn't argue. He stood before them, shoulders straight, voice steady. "Yes, I broke your rules," he said. "But I will never apologize for saving a life. If this career is gone, so be it. I've already found something greater to live for." The room erupted in whispers. He didn't care. That night, Adrian found Mariah sitting by her mother's bedside, her face lit softly by the glow of machines. He approached quietly, and when she looked up, he finally said the words he had been holding back. "Mariah, I love you." Her lips parted, her eyes filling. "Adrian, I don't care about the board, or the papers, or the world outside these walls. The only thing I care about is you. Do you understand?" She covered her mouth with trembling fingers, tears falling freely. "I've loved you from the very beginning. Even when I tried to walk away, I never could." He sank to his knees beside her, taking her hand, pressing it against his cheek. "Then don't walk away. Stay with me." Her answer was a sob and a whisper, "Always." The days that followed were not easy. Adrian faced hearings, the possibility of losing his license forever. Mariah's mother remained fragile, her recovery slow. Poverty still lingered at their doorstep. But something had changed. Adrian no longer carried his life like a burden. Mariah no longer walked through her days in fear. They had chosen each other. Not because it was easy, not because it was safe, but because without each other, nothing else mattered. And for the first time, love made them strong enough to face anything. Weeks later, Adrian stood before the medical board for the final time. The chairman's voice was sharp as steel. "Dr. Hill, you disregarded direct orders. The consequences could have been catastrophic." Adrian's jaw tightened, but his voice was calm. "The only catastrophe would have been letting a woman die when I could save her. If this career is gone, then it was never worth having." For a long moment, silence filled the chamber. Then one older doctor leaned forward. "You saved a life. That is the essence of medicine. You may have bent the rules, Drive, Hale, but perhaps you reminded us all what they are for." The vote was cast. His license was restored, though under close watch. Adrian accepted without pride, without anger. All he felt was relief. Not for himself, but because it meant he could continue fighting for those who needed him. Mariah's mother grew stronger, step by step. One afternoon, Adrian and Mariah wheeled her into the garden outside the hospital. Sunshine spilled across her pale face, and she smiled for the first time in weeks. "Thank you, Drive, Hill," she whispered. Adrian glanced at Mariah, his chest tightening. "Call me Adrian," he said softly. Mariah squeezed his hand beneath the blanket, their secret vow pulsing between their fingers. "We are in this together." Life didn't magically become easy. Adrian still bore whispers, judgment, and scrutiny. Mariah still worked, still counted coins carefully, still felt the shadow of poverty behind her. But they faced it differently now. Together, Adrian opened his once empty mansion to Mariah and her mother. Laughter began to echo where silence had ruled. The sterile halls filled with life. Books, flowers, little signs of her warmth. For Mariah, it was never about wealth. It was about love. And for Adrian, it was never about control. It was about finally letting himself be touched. Heart, body, and soul. One evening, as the sun set behind the city, Adrian led Mariah to the rooftop garden he had neglected for years. It was overgrown, wild, untamed, much like his heart had once been. "I thought I was destined to die cold and untouched," he said quietly. "But then you came. You shattered everything I thought I knew, and you gave me life." Mariah's eyes brimmed with tears. "And you gave me hope when I had none. You taught me that love isn't about what you have, it's about what you give." Adrian reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, simple ring. Not gold, not jeweled, but silver, humble and unassuming, like the girl who had changed him. "Stay with me, Mariah. Not for a night, not for a season, for a lifetime." Her answer was a whisper carried by the wind. Yes. Their story wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale written in silk and roses. It was messy, painful, scarred by the world's cruelty. But it was real. A cold doctor who had never touched a woman. A poor girl who sold her night for survival. Two broken souls who found, in each other, the kind of love that heals. And when people whispered, judged, and mocked, Adrian and Mariah only smiled, because they knew something the world had forgotten. That love is not measured by appearances, nor by wealth, nor by rules written in stone. It is measured by the courage to choose each other, again and again, even when the world says you shouldn't. And in that choice, they found not just love, But freedom. Sometimes the most unexpected love stories are the ones that save us. If this tale touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us all, love conquers the coldest hearts.